I wasn't snooping. I wasn't digging through her phone or lurking in the shadows, nothing like that. It just happened. That's the truth. It was a Thursday evening, just a regular damn evening. I got home from work around 6:30, tired as hell. The week had been long, and my head was still full of spreadsheets and deadlines. I remember it was raining, the kind that makes the world look blurry from your truck windshield. The smell of wet concrete was still fresh in my nose when I walked into the house. Madison, my wife of 9 years, was in the kitchen when she had just gotten back from yoga or Pilates or one of those trendy classes she always took. Her hair was pulled up, loose strands sticking to her neck, and she had on those black leggings and one of those oversized sweaters that slid off one shoulder. She looked pretty, like always. I loved her in those quiet moments, just being herself, or at least what I thought was herself. She was making a cocktail, her usual Thursday thing. She'd always say, "One more day till Friday, might as well pretend it's the weekend." I'd usually laugh at that. She was slicing a lime with that little knife she liked, humming some pop song I didn't know. There was music coming from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner, something soft, maybe Norah Jones or something like that. I sat down on the couch with the remote in my hand, ready to flip through the usual channels, not really sure what I wanted to watch. That's when I saw it. Her Apple Watch was resting on the table next to the couch. Charging. The screen was still lit up. I don't know why it was still glowing. Maybe she just tapped it, or maybe it got bumped. I don't know. But I saw the message. It was one of those little things, but it changed everything. "See you at the cottage next Friday. I'll bring the wine. You bring your smile." That was the message. Just a few words. Nothing explicit. Nothing loud. But it hit like a hammer. And the name it came from? Danny. With a flame emoji. My stomach twisted. I felt like I was falling but still sitting up. The room went kind of quiet, even though the music was still playing. It felt like someone had suddenly turned the color down on everything. The warm light in the living room seemed colder. Her laugh from the kitchen felt distant, like I was hearing it through a closed window. I sat there, frozen, reading it again. "See you at the cottage next Friday." What cottage? We didn't own a cottage. Her family didn't own a cottage. None of our friends did, at least none I'd ever heard her mention. "I'll bring the wine." She liked wine. Always had. Red, usually. Sometimes white if it was hot out. It was her thing. "You bring your smile." That line felt like someone pressing a knife slowly into my chest. It was too personal. Too warm. Too familiar. She doesn't have a friend named Danny. And not when she'd text like that, anyway. I know all her friends. The gym girls. Her book club crew. Her coworker from the design studio. And definitely no Danny with a flame emoji next to his name. I blinked a few times, trying to think straight, trying not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was a joke? Maybe it was a group text? Maybe I misread it? But the sick part was that I didn't really believe any of that. Deep down, I knew. We always know. Maybe not at first. Maybe not completely. But we know when something's off. She came into the room a minute later holding 2 glasses, one of them for me. "I made us palomas," she said, cheerful, sliding the glass into my hand. I looked up at her, trying to act normal. "Thanks," I said, and took a sip. It tasted like tequila, grapefruit, and something bitter I couldn't name. She flopped down beside me, kicking her feet up onto the coffee table. "Want to watch something? Or are we just zoning out tonight?" I smiled. Zoning out sounds good. I kept my face straight. I laughed at her joke about her boss. I held her hand when she reached for mine. But I couldn't stop thinking about that message. That stupid little message. One message. One moment. That's all it took. A crack in the dam. And once a crack shows, you can't unsee it. You can't patch it with denial. You can't glue it together with hope. The next Friday rolled around slower than any other day I can remember. Every minute at work felt like 5. My hands kept shaking, so much so that I spilled coffee on a file folder right before lunch. My manager, Tom, asked if I was feeling okay. I told him I was heading out early to get ready for a weekend work seminar in Asheville, something I made up a week ago, and even mentioned to Madison so she wouldn't suspect a thing. She smiled and told me to enjoy it. Said she'd be using the weekend to catch up on her reading. By 3:45, I was already parked across from her office, tucked behind a line of bushes and a half-dead oak tree on the edge of the parking lot. I sat there with the engine off, watching the front door like a hunter in a blind. I had half a gas station sandwich in my lap and a cold can of Coke sweating in the cup holder. Didn't eat either. My stomach wasn't interested. At 5:06, she walked out. She didn't look like she just wrapped up a workday. Not at all. She wore these tight black jeans that I don't think I'd seen her wear in over a year. Black heels, too, high ones she used to complain about when we go to weddings. Her hair was done in soft waves, not tied up like it normally is after work. She wore a white blouse that dipped a little lower than usual and a leather jacket she hadn't touched since spring. She looked like she was heading out for drinks. With someone special. I followed her at a safe distance. She didn't head home. She didn't take the freeway south toward downtown like she usually did when she met her friends at the wine bar. She didn't stop at the gym or the grocery store or anywhere that would have made this easier to explain. She headed north. Once we were past the suburbs, the scenery started to change. Strip malls faded into trees. Fast food places gave way to winding two-lane roads and fields of nothing. The sky was turning orange at the edges, the way it does when the sun starts dragging its heels behind the hills. I followed about 3 cars behind, never losing her taillights. I turned off my radio, rolled the window down just a bit to keep myself alert. All I could hear was the hum of tires and the steady thump of my heartbeat. 35 minutes later, we passed an old sign that said Lake Briarwood, 3 miles. I'd never heard her mention the lake. Never been there with her. She took a turn down a gravel road that didn't have a name. Just a little mailbox at the corner, dented and rusty. I slowed down and passed by, counting to 20 before I turned around and came back, pulling off to the side and cutting the lights. I waited. A few minutes later, I crept my truck down the road, crawling along like I was delivering mail. The trees grew thick on both sides, tall and old. Then it opened up. A small cabin sat on the edge of a clearing, tucked up close to the tree line, with a deck that wrapped around the front. There was a fire pit out back, and a canoe leaned against the side of the porch. Her car was there, parked right in front, headlights off. I pulled off the road about 50 yards back, hidden behind a thicket of pine and oak. From there, I could see the cabin clearly but stay out of view. I killed the engine and watched. She stepped out onto the porch, looking around. She was checking to see if anyone else was there, I figured. Then the front door opened, and a man came out. He was taller than me, probably a few years older, 45, maybe 50. Thick build, salt and pepper beard. He wore a red flannel shirt and dark jeans, like something out of a fall clothing ad. His hair was short on the sides, combed back on top. He smiled like he'd been waiting all day for her. She walked up and hugged him. Then they kissed. Not a quick, polite kiss either. It was slow, familiar, like they'd done it 100 times before. They stood there talking for a minute, her laughing, him rubbing her arm, and then he led her inside. 20 minutes later, the porch light turned off. I sat in my truck, frozen. The trees swayed, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, but everything else was still. The kind of still that presses on your chest like a weight. The kind of still that says you were right. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a coincidence. It was real. The woman I shared my home with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, had a whole other world hidden up here in the woods. A second life. And now I'd seen it with my own eyes. I couldn't keep doing it alone. After that Friday, I was a wreck. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, my appetite was gone, and I hadn't had a decent night's rest in days. I kept running everything through my head on a loop. What I saw, what it meant, what I should do next. I was worn thin. Just going to work felt like climbing a mountain. I'd sit at my desk pretending to read emails, but all I saw was Madison smile as she stepped up onto that cabin porch. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more. I needed the truth laid out clear as day. No questions left. Nothing that could be explained away. That's when I decided to bring in help. I asked around, quietly. One of the guys at the shop, Eddie, said his cousin used a PI last year when his wife started acting shady. Gave me the guy's name. Leighton. Just Leighton. No last name listed on the card. Just a phone number and a little logo that looked like an eye inside a gear. I called him that evening. He met me the next morning at a diner. He was about 6 feet tall, lean, and serious. Wore a plain blue jacket, cargo pants, and boots that had seen some miles. His handshake was firm and his voice low and steady, like a man who never had to raise it to get respect. Said he was former military, used to do recon, and now he just liked quiet work. I told him everything, about the message on her watch, about following her to the cabin, about the man in the red flannel. I gave him the time, the location, the car make and plate. He nodded, took notes on a small leather pad, and never once looked surprised. Like he'd heard 100 stories just like mine. I'll give it 10 days, he said. Enough time for a pattern to show up. He asked for half up front. I handed him a thick envelope of cash I'd pulled from savings. Didn't feel great, but I needed the answers. The waiting was brutal. Every day that passed felt like walking barefoot across gravel. I'd come home and stare at Madison, trying to figure out how she could laugh at sitcoms with me or complain about traffic while carrying that kind of secret. She'd kiss me on the cheek before heading out to the bookstore or meeting friends for wine, and I'd smile back like I believed every word. I hated that I had to pretend. I hated how natural she made lying look. On the 9th day, Leighton called and told me to meet him in the same booth at the diner. I barely touched my coffee when I got there. He walked in right on time, pulled a folder from his backpack, and slid it across the table. Inside was a USB drive, a few printed photos, and a sheet of GPS logs. I didn't say anything. I just opened the first photo. There she was, my wife, at that same cabin, stepping out of her car with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She was smiling. Her hair was pinned up. She looked excited, nervous even. The next photo showed the bearded guy. Leighton had zoomed in enough to see his face clearly. Another photo, Madison pouring wine into 2 glasses inside the cabin. Then another one of them standing close near the fireplace, laughing. The footage on the USB, that was the worst of it. Leighton had used a drone, a quiet little thing with night vision and a long lens. He flew it up just before dusk and hovered it near the tree line. The footage was steady, clear. You could hear the wind rustling the trees. See the flames from the fireplace dancing inside the cabin. They stood close, whispering and touching each other like teenagers hiding from their parents. I watched her take off her jacket, then her sweater. He wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him like she belonged there. I paused it. I couldn't keep going. She looked different in the video, not just her appearance. Her entire face was softer, her voice lighter. The way she laughed, it wasn't the forced chuckle I got when I told a joke. It was open, real, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. I've got the dates, the drives, the cabin ownership. Belongs to the guy's cousin, apparently, he said, tapping the GPS sheet. They've met up 3 times. Always Friday. Always up there. I nodded, paid him the rest in cash. He didn't offer any advice. Just shook my hand and left. I sat there in that diner for a long time. Even on the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about how different she was in those videos. How easily she'd slid into that other life, like she was just changing shoes. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the realization that the person I thought I knew so well had become a stranger right in front of me, and I'd been too blind to see it. I didn't bring it up that night, or the next. I didn't ask her who Danny was. I didn't mention the cottage, or the drone footage, or the fact that I knew where she went every Friday. I didn't accuse her, didn't raise my voice, didn't even give her the cold shoulder. I just went about my days like nothing was different, even though everything was. Every second around her became harder to stomach. It felt like living with a ghost. Or maybe I was the ghost, floating through our house, unseen, irrelevant. I needed time, not for forgiveness. I'd long given up on that, but to make sure everything was lined up. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want some dramatic showdown. I wanted to hit her with the truth so clean and cold she couldn't deny it. I wanted the hammer to fall quiet and final. So I waited. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I got up early and made breakfast. I didn't usually cook much. Madison handled most of the meals, but pancakes had always been my thing. From our early dating days, she used to brag to her friends about my weekend flapjacks. Said they tasted better than any she'd ever had. That might have been true, or it might have been love talking. Either way, I hadn't made them in a long time. I got out the griddle, mixed the batter from scratch, sliced up strawberries just how she liked, even warmed the maple syrup on the stove so it wouldn't be cold when it hit the plate. I poured her a glass of orange juice and a cup of her favorite French roast. Everything neat, quiet. I set the table and waited. She came down wearing one of my old t-shirts and a pair of leggings, barefoot, hair still messy from sleep. She blinked a few times when she saw the table, then smiled. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, coming over. "Did I forget our anniversary or something?" "No," I said, pulling her chair out. "Just figured we could use a slow morning." She sat, stretching like a cat. "Smells amazing. You even made the syrup warm. Haven't seen you go all out like this in forever." I took a seat across from her. "Figured you deserved it." We started eating. She took 2 bites before pausing and smiling at me over the rim of her coffee mug. What brought all this on? I just looked at her. Calm. Quiet. I didn't smile. I reached beside me and pulled out a plain white envelope. I placed it right in the center of the table, just beside the syrup bottle. "What's that?" she asked, her voice light, but her fingers already slowing. Your pass, I said. She picked it up, opening it slowly like she was expecting to find concert tickets or a handwritten note. Instead, she pulled out a neat stack of legal pages. Her eyes scanned the first few lines. Her face changed instantly. Petition for divorce. It said right at the top, bold and unavoidable. She stared at the words. Her hands started to tremble. Kevin, she said, blinking hard. Baby, this is a joke, right? No, I said, standing up. Not a joke, just the facts. Her voice cracked. Wait, hold on. What is this? Where is this coming from? I kept my eyes on her, unmoving. Danny says hi. The name hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at the papers again, and her face turned pale, like someone had drained the color right out of her. I don't know what you think. I know what I saw, I said, calm as ever. I know about the cabin, the Fridays, the wine. I've seen it, Madison. All of it. Don't insult me by pretending. She dropped the papers and pushed back from the table like it burned her. You were spying on me? No, I said. You handed it to me. With that message. The one on your watch. You just didn't know I was paying attention. She looked like she might cry, but no tears came. Just a stunned kind of silence. Her eyes darted around the kitchen like she was trying to figure out how to rewind time. Or escape. I thought we were fine, she whispered. You thought I was blind, I replied. The house felt too quiet. The birds chirping outside sounded distant. The air felt thick. She stood slowly, as if she didn't trust her legs. Kevin, please. We can talk about this. We can fix. There's nothing to fix. I cut in. This was your choice. I'm just following through. She looked down at the papers again, then back at me, her eyes glassy. She didn't reach for me. Didn't beg. Not yet. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the pancakes untouched on my plate. The coffee had gone cold. Behind me, I heard her sit back down in the chair and pick up the envelope. I didn't turn around. That night after the breakfast talk, the house was quiet, too quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. Madison stayed upstairs most of the day. I didn't go after her. Didn't say another word. I spent the afternoon in the garage, sorting through drawers, gathering the things I needed. Around sunset, I started my task. I went to my computer, opened the folder I had saved under a fake name, invoices_2022, and opened the images one by one. Leighton had done his job well. Every picture was sharp. Every shot told a story I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Madison laughing with him at the porch, holding his hand on the deck, clinking wine glasses by the fire, sitting on the railing with her legs swinging like a carefree teenager. At one point, the guy had his arms wrapped around her while she rested her head on his chest. The kind of thing that should have been between her and me. But there it was, frozen in time, clear as day, in pictures that cut like a blade. I printed every single one. Pages and pages, full color. I watched them feed out of the printer like some sick photo album from a life I was never a part of. Then I went back and printed the messages I had copied from her watch backup. Some recovered from the cloud, others from old device logs. Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing. Friday can't come soon enough. You make me feel alive again. That one stuck with me the most. Alive again. Like the years we spent together were some kind of slow death. I saved everything to a small black USB drive and labeled it M. I didn't know why. Maybe for Madison. Maybe for memory. Maybe just to have one place to bury it all. I took the stack of pictures and printed messages. Then I pulled out our photo albums. Ones we kept from our wedding, vacations, holidays. They were neatly arranged in a cabinet under the TV. The wedding album had dust on it. Funny how something that used to mean so much could be ignored for years. I didn't bother flipping through it. I just added it to the pile. Then came the frames. The hallway had at least 6 of them. Our anniversary dinner, the trip to Colorado, her laughing on the pier in Charleston. There were more on the mantle. Her graduation, us at my brother's barbecue, the time we carved pumpkins with her niece. Every photo was smiling. Everyone felt like a lie now. I walked all of it out to the backyard, where the old steel trash can sat next to the fence under the oak tree. I had used it for burning leaves in the fall, clearing out dead branches and twigs after storms. Tonight, it had a different purpose. I loaded everything in, photo albums, printed pictures, the stack of messages, even the old journal I'd found a year ago where she used to write about our early years together. Back then it was full of hope. I didn't bother reading it again. The hope was gone now. I struck the match. One single match against the box. I dropped it into the can, and within seconds, the paper caught. Flames started to crawl across the photos. I watched as smiles turned to ash. There's something strange about watching your life burn in pieces. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel worse. I just felt empty, like everything I'd built was now in that fire, and all that was left was heat and smoke. The fire snapped and popped as it ate through the paper and plastic. The USB melted quickly. The wedding album curled into itself, the corners blackening first. Madison's handwriting in the journal flared up and vanished. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, staring at the flames. A breeze picked up, carrying some of the smoke toward the neighbor's yard. Mrs. Mackenzie, sweet lady in her late 60s, poked her head over the fence. Her hair was up in a scarf, and she had a worried look on her face. "You all right, Kevin?" she asked. "What's all that you're burning?" I paused, looked at her, then looked back at the fire. "Just cleaning up the house," I said. She squinted at me for a second longer, like she knew there was more to it. But she didn't press. "Well, don't stay out too late," she said finally. "Supposed to rain later." I nodded. "Thanks." She disappeared behind the fence. The fire kept going. I stood there until the flames died down into a soft glow. Just embers and the occasional flicker. Nothing but blackened metal and a faint trail of smoke curling into the night sky. When I went back inside, the house felt different. Lighter, in a way, like some weight had been peeled off the walls. Madison didn't come downstairs. The lights were off in our bedroom. I didn't care. The past was gone, still warm in the can outside. And I wasn't dragging it any further. I started early Saturday morning. Started as soon as Madison left for work and stepped over the threshold of the house. I didn't know if she was still crying, still stewing, or just pretending none of this was happening. It didn't matter anymore. I had a job to do, and I was going to do it right. I walked from room to room with 3 boxes and a roll of packing tape. I labeled everything: closet, bathroom, books, miscellaneous. I didn't throw anything. No anger, no breaking plates or shouting. I was methodical. Everything she owned, every little trinket or sweater or makeup brush, I gathered it all. I didn't want anything of hers left behind when she walked out that door. The attic was the hardest. I hadn't been up there in a long time. Dust hung in the air like fog when I opened the hatch. I had to grab the stepladder from the garage and carry it upstairs. Her wedding dress was stored in a white box, wrapped in plastic, buried under some of our old winter coats. It looked untouched, like it had just been packed away last week instead of nearly a decade ago. I stood there a while, holding it in my hands, thinking about the day she wore it, how she looked at me from the top of the aisle, how her smile made my knees shake. I didn't cry. I didn't get sentimental. I placed it gently into a clear plastic container and sealed the lid. Done. By the time Sunday rolled around, the sun was starting to go down. The sky was orange and pink, like the kind of sunset you'd take a photo of if your mind wasn't full of disappointment. The air smelled like fresh grass and the last stretch of summer. I had spent the last of the afternoon carrying every single box out to the driveway. I made sure nothing was left in the house. Not a sock, not a book, not a photo. Everything she owned was stacked up neatly beside the garage. Her suitcases, her decorations, her craft supplies, even her collection of herbal teas. There were about 20 boxes in total. I draped a tarp over them in case it rained. She came home a little after 7. I heard her car before I saw it. Slow tires on gravel, then the slam of the door. I opened the front door before she had the chance to knock. She stood there in her blue jeans and a gray hoodie, looking like she had been crying or maybe just not sleeping. Her hair was in a ponytail, and she held her purse like she wasn't sure she should come in. She didn't speak first. I just pointed toward the driveway. She turned to look. Took a long pause. Then, slowly, her head turned back to me. "Are you kicking me out?" she asked, her voice sharp and loud. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm asking you nicely. But if I have to, I'll throw them out." "You can't do this," she snapped, stepping forward. "This is my house too. You don't get to decide." I crossed my arms. "Actually, I do." She stared at me, wide-eyed. "The house is in my name. Deed and mortgage. Look it up." She hesitated. She didn't believe me at first. Then she did what I expected. She reached for her phone, stepped back onto the porch, and made a call. 15 minutes later, 2 officers showed up. They parked on the street and walked up calmly. I knew one of them, Officer Lane. We'd gone to high school together. Madison walked up to them, animated, clearly explaining her side. Her voice was cracking. Her hands kept pointing at me, then at the house, then at the driveway. They came over and asked to speak to me privately. I showed them the deed. I had it printed out and signed, stored in a folder on the kitchen table. I handed it over without a word. They read it, looked at the date, looked at the documents. Then they walked back to her. Madison's tone changed. She started panicking. Her words came faster, her voice louder. They stayed calm, patient. After a short conversation, one of the officers gently asked her to begin gathering whatever else she needed from inside the house. She didn't like it, but she didn't have a choice. She had 20 minutes. She stormed inside and grabbed some things: chargers, a few clothes she had forgotten, her laptop bag. She slammed drawers and muttered under her breath the whole time. I just stood by the door, arms crossed, saying nothing. When she came out, they handed her a citation for the false police report. She stared at it in disbelief, then glared at me like I'd somehow tricked the law itself. "You think this makes you right?" she hissed. "No," I said. "It just makes you gone." She didn't respond, just dragged the first box toward her car. I watched her pack everything, one piece at a time. When she finally drove away, the only thing left behind was a deep tire mark on the gravel. And silence. 2 months after she left, we were standing across from each other in a courtroom. It was a cool morning in October. Stood there in a plain navy suit that didn't quite fit like it used to, hands tucked in my pockets, heart steady. I was tired, but clear. Madison arrived 20 minutes late. She walked in wearing a fitted beige pantsuit, hair curled, makeup done. She didn't look like the woman I used to know. She looked like she was walking into a business negotiation. The man next to her was her lawyer, some fancy guy from out of town in a slick gray suit and shiny shoes. I could tell he was expensive just by the way he walked, like the whole courthouse was beneath him. She didn't look at me right away. When she finally did, her expression was strange, part pity, part pride, part fear. She kept her chin high, though, and sat down like she already knew how this was going to play out. Like she thought I didn't have the guts to fight her in here. The court clerk called our case number. The judge, an older man with a gravel voice and tired eyes, took his seat and motioned us forward. My lawyer, Rachel, had already told me to stay calm, answer only when spoken to, and let her handle the rest. I trusted her. She was sharp, honest, and didn't waste time on fluff. Madison's lawyer started things off with confidence. He painted her as a supportive, devoted wife who had helped maintain the emotional foundation of the marriage while I was focused on work and absent emotionally. He talked about shared assets, how the house was clearly a marital property regardless of the deed, and how Madison had abandoned her career aspirations to support me and help build the business together. I sat there listening, jaw tight, stomach clenched. He made it sound like she was a saint, and I was just some distracted fool who didn't appreciate her sacrifices. Madison nodded along, even dabbed her eyes at one point. It was a performance. Polished. Practiced. Then Rachel stood up. She was calm. Measured. No theatrics. She handed over the photos. The logs. The drone footage. The receipts from the cabin. She went down a list so thorough and so matter-of-fact that the judge had to pause twice just to catch up. And then came the messages. Printed and highlighted. "I'll bring the wine. You bring your smile. Can't wait to be in your arms again. Friday can't come fast enough." The judge's expression changed. It was subtle, just a raised eyebrow, a small frown, but it was enough to make Madison shift in her seat. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just presented the truth like a ledger. Line by line. Fact by fact. No room for denial. Madison's lawyer tried to object, claimed it was private correspondence, irrelevant, emotional revenge. The judge didn't buy it. Then it was Madison's turn to speak. She tried to act composed, but her voice shook. She said things had been hard, that she'd felt neglected, that I was emotionally distant and unavailable, that she made a mistake. She said those words 3 times. I made a mistake. She talked about confusion, about feeling lost, about needing something she couldn't explain. The judge let her talk, but when she finished, he didn't look moved. He looked like a man who had heard the same song 1,000 times. When he gave his ruling, it was quiet but firm. The house remained mine, fully and without contest. The business, which I had built from the ground up before she ever got involved, was to remain solely in my name. No alimony. No division of the retirement accounts. No spousal support. The judge said, quite clearly, that Madison had and compromised the integrity of the partnership through ongoing misconduct. Madison's lawyer tried to argue, but it didn't matter. The gavel came down. Case closed. I stood up slowly, collected my papers. Rachel patted me on the shoulder. Madison stood frozen. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped to her knees right there on the courtroom floor. Her purse fell to the ground beside her, and she looked up at me like I had just walked out of a burning house with her heart in my hands. "Kevin," she said, voice shaking. "I'll do anything. I don't care about the money. I don't want the house. I want you." The whole courtroom went quiet. Even the clerk looked uncomfortable. She was crying now, tears running down her cheeks, hands clasped together like a prayer. "Please, Kevin, I don't want to lose you. I made a mistake." I looked at her for what felt like a full minute. Then I turned and walked out. Didn't say a word. Didn't look back. And just like that, it was done. 6 months passed. It felt longer. Sometimes, it felt like no time at all. Life had found a rhythm again. I went to work, came home, watched the games, grilled in the backyard when the weather was nice. I fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping since March. I finally cleaned out the garage. I even started going to the gym again. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself. I was just trying to feel like a whole person again. Some days I did. Other days I didn't. But I was getting there. One Wednesday morning, I took the day off to take care of a few errands. One of them was long overdue. My driver's license was set to expire the following week. I didn't want to deal with the hassle of waiting till the last minute, so I headed down to the DMV. It was one of those slow government mornings where nothing seemed to be moving, even though the room was full. I took my number, B213, and stood behind a woman in a beige coat, hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She looked thin, almost too thin. Her shoes were worn, the kind of tired you don't just get from a bad night's sleep. She turned her head slightly, enough to see me from the corner of her eye. Then she turned all the way around. It was Madison. For a second, she just looked at me. Not with anger, not with pride, just stillness. She had no makeup on. Her face looked pale, and there were small lines near her eyes I hadn't noticed before. Her cheeks were a little sunken, and her hands clutched a manila envelope against her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. "Kevin," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I just gave her a small nod. "I wasn't sure if it was you," she said, her voice soft, almost unsure. "You look different." I shrugged. "Feel different." She smiled, but it was a sad sort of smile. The kind people wear when they want to say something and don't know how. Her eyes stayed on mine. "I've wanted to call you," she said. "So many times. Just to talk. Just to say I'm sorry." She looked down at her shoes, then back up. "I made a huge mistake, Kevin." I studied her face. I could tell she meant it. Not just the words, but the weight behind them. She looked like someone who had been carrying a bag of bricks around and had just realized it wasn't going to get lighter. "I know," I said. "I've been there." She blinked. Her lips trembled. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, like she didn't want to cry in front of me, like she didn't deserve to. "Do you still hate me?" she asked, voice barely holding together. I thought about it. Not long. Just enough to be honest. I shook my head. "No." She exhaled, almost in relief. Then I added, "That would mean I still care about you." That hit her harder than anything else I could have said. Her smile faded, and her shoulders seemed to sink a little. She looked down at the floor, quiet. I could hear the number board beep overhead. Someone's number got called. Mine. B213. I looked at the counter, then back at her. "Take care, Madison." And I walked toward the desk. Didn't look back. Didn't check if she was still watching. Just handed the woman my forms, signed my name, and moved on. That was the end of our story, and I haven't seen her since. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Madison was expecting when she came home that Sunday? Why do cheaters assume forgiveness is still an option? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.